Hey everyone, welcome to the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, Coffee with Coaches. I'm here today with Coach Reese and Coach Katie, and super excited to talk about her recent experience at the Tahoe 200. I was back home frantically tracking this race. I had a friend and an athlete in it, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it was so much fun watching and seeing where everybody was in the race. And I was texting Katie frantically because at one point the tracker went out. So, more on that later too. But thanks for joining us today. And thanks so much, Katie, for coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, this is going to be an exciting conversation. I think, it's one thing to run these events, and I just got this at Kettle, but it's a completely different thing to crew these events. So I crewed 100K, which is a pretty big endeavor. You got to be like on the mark with what you're doing, what you're offering your runner. You got to be at certain places at certain times. But I couldn't imagine crewing and pacing after 100 miles. So it's going to be interesting hearing the perspective from that, let alone Tahoe 200 is just a world-renowned 200-mile race at this point. So I'm sure just being a part of the event too and getting to see all the runners and see the spectacle that is such a big event was amazing as well.
100%.
But okay, so kind of walk us through where did your duties start as crew, and then where did you pick up pacing? Kind of give us a rundown of the effort.
Yeah, so for all these 200s, you check in the day before. So the race started Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And so Thursday is kind of all the pre-race stuff. So you go in, and this is what's kind of, I remember last year just being crazy, like, whoa, it's different than 100. You go to pick up your stuff, but like for here, they give you this little note card, and it's like, here's your journey to follow along with check-in, So you check in, she gets her bib, and then you have to go and make sure you get like medical check, which is just like medical asking you, not like if you're crazy, because we're all crazy, but like, do you have any allergies? Like, so it's so cool from the little, like, you don't think about all the little things behind the scenes, right? Like we see some of it obviously with Ornery Mule also putting on races, but these bigger events, it's wild how many things are going on behind the scenes. So I feel like check-in gives you that good, like, wow, there are so many things going on and there's so many people watching to make sure that, like, the athletes are safe. It's really cool. So check in with medical, which is just like they keep notes on everybody. Like, do you have pacers? Are you going solo? Do you take medication? Have you done this before? Do you have any typical things that could maybe go wrong? So they keep really cool notes on everybody. And then you check to make sure you have all your mandatory gear, so they go through your pack and make sure, you got all your things. And then also on your phone or on your watch, they check to make sure you have the course downloaded, because that's another requirement. And then it's like the fun stuff, the pre-race mug shot, where you look all clean and happy and like, yeah, I'm doing this thing. You get all your swag and all that stuff. And it's just kind of cool to see, the community beforehand, like the befores, before things get wild and crazy. So that's kind of the day before. And then, you drop off your drop bags too. So they make sure they get them to all the different spots. And then the next morning, it's funny because we're all, standing there as the people support crew, and, the gun goes off and they say their little, if I die, lost, whatever, it's on me, Candace's little thing. And then the gun goes off and it's this like excitement. And then it's a 200. So nobody's rushing out of the gate. So we were all laughing. And it's like, go, and we're all like cheering. And then it's like, and then the conga line starts, So, and then the crazy thing that's so different from crewing a longer, like a 200 versus 100 is then you just have so much time to wait for your runner. So the way Tahoe worked, we couldn't see Nicole, our runner, until like the next day. So she had 60 some miles on her own. So yeah, my phone, I think my refresh on my tracker was probably broken because I just kept refreshing to see, how everyone's doing. But it's just, I immediately wrote my crew and was like, the waiting is so hard. How do you guys wait for so long? Because you're just, and I don't do good with downtime. So it was such a good learning curve for me the first day of just like being okay with the downtime, but yeah, that was kind of pre-race, race start. And then as we waited for her, it was just a matter of checking the tracker, make sure she's kind of looking like she's on her guesstimates for when we are going to see her the next day. And then because Tahoe is so like, you're in a town, you're not like in the middle of nowhere. We just were kind of going around and getting like, what can we get done today so that once we start to see her, then the madness is rolling. There's not as much time. So it was like, people talked about, getting Tahoe lung and your nose being really dry. So we got like some nasal rinse and some lozenges, like just some things that, as we were kind of talking to other crews, like you could hear that we were going to need for these next few days. So let's just kind of knock all that stuff out.
I love it. I love taking that proactive time because like in my head, I'm like, okay, you can't see your runner for an entire day. Like, what do? Do you go have a burger at a local like restaurant? Do you go like for your own long run? Like, so I like that, like you're taking that time where it's like seemingly like there is no rush on you for that time, but anticipating like, hey, what could I potentially need? So that way when I'm in the middle of nowhere, like picking up my runner or whatever, like I don't have to drive 3 hours to go get nasal rinse, to drive 3 hours back to try to meet up with the runner at some like, predetermined unknown spot. So
Right.
and
Right.
I think too, that probably comes down to a lot of like getting to know your runner, right? Like you can't really anticipate what somebody is going to need if you don't know what they prefer or what could potentially come up. So I like that you said too that like you did some research beforehand and you heard about did you call it Tahoe lung?
Yeah, it's so dusty. So yeah, people come in and they sound like they've been smokers for their lifetime. They're just hacking and coughing. It's gross. And I now being there, I understand it's just so dusty. So everybody by all the runners probably by day 1.5 were just everybody had a cough, you know. It was wild. Yeah. So you just kind of
No.
learn little things along the way and make sure you at least have, I think, right, like crewing is like having options, because we all know, like as runners ourselves, right, you could have the best plan and you get somewhere and you're like, I was going to have this, and that thing could look horrible to you, or you could end up meeting something completely off the radar. So it's like having all the little things for options is key.
Yeah. And was this your runner's first time running the race?
No, so kind of crazy. So Nicole and I met at Bigfoot last year.
Mhm.
We were the only two females coming from the Midwest. There was a couple other guys, so we kind of had our own little side Midwest chat going, and just kind of kept in touch after the race. And she said she'd signed up for Tahoe, and wanted to know if I would, be interested in coming out to crew and help. And I was like, oh my gosh, one, it's such an honor to be asked to help. Like it's such a journey, right? And so we know, like, when you ask someone to help for this, it's hard to ask the question, right? It's hard to ask our friends and family for help, but also such an honor. Like I know we both, I feel like I could speak for the three of us. Like if someone asks, you feel honored to be able to be help and be a part of that process. So also it let me kind of be back in the community, before my next race too, which was super cool. So, but we didn't really know each other, like from, oh, I've known her for years and I've run with her here.
Mhm.
So also too is just, kind of us chatting a little bit beforehand on, what do you like in a pacer? What have you loved? What do you hate? I can be a little like, I'm a very glass half full, like yay person. And so sometimes that is like too much energy for people, so it's like asking her, like, what do you like? What do you want us to do when you come in? And so she was really good too about, I think, having that experience last year and knowing like what she had to do on her own versus what would have been nice to have some help with, so it was kind of gauging all that too, beforehand. But yeah, other than that, it's just kind of, like when you're pacing, it's just reading the room, right? Like if you can tell someone's maybe not responding when you're talking, it's like, hey, do you need some quiet time now? Or do you want me just to talk so that you can just kind of zone out and think, about what you're doing? Or do you want music? Or do you want none of the above? And we're just going to grind this section and listen to nature, So kind of being prepared, but also in the moment being open to what your runner kind of needs.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's really well said, because that's how I felt when I was crewing and pacing at Cocodona too. It's just like, okay, what do you need? You can sort of start to feel the silence setting in, like, okay, I need time in my own headspace, or no, help me, I need some music, or whatever it
Yeah.
might.
Yeah.
Or those little preferences of, do you run ahead of, do you run behind, do you,
Yes.
like what
Yes.
to talk about. Like I've heard other stories about runners and pacers where pacers have little note cards of like talking topics or like little like cheesy jokes or something like that, or a list of people they can call when things get tough, to motivate their runner thing and whatnot. So like I definitely think it's important to have those conversations beforehand. And I think one of the best things that a crew member did for me a couple years ago for kettle was ask me like point blank, like, what do you not want me to do? Like, what is absolutely like, you don't want to see this at all. You're never going to want to see this. You don't want me to do this. You don't want this, you know? So having those conversations too, I think are like pretty important because, you know, there's a lot of things that can like uplift us, but there's a couple things that like just for me like grind my gears. Like my response to that was like, I don't want you to tell me I'm doing a good job. I don't want you to tell me that it's okay. I don't want you, like, if I'm puking in the side of a trash bucket, I don't want you like rubbing my back and saying like, it's going to be okay. It's like, I know it's going to be okay. I just have to stop puking so I can leave. I don't like, you know, but some people, that's how they respond. They're like, when they're puking, it's like the world might be over. Right. Like some people have like a fear of that happening during the race. So knowing like, hey, during these best case scenarios, what is awesome. And then during these worst case scenarios, how do you uplift somebody out is pretty important. So
Right.
it's always good to be prepared for multiple things like you said, whether it's having nasal rinse or having a word of encouragement that really resonates with your run.
Right.
Especially when it's like,
Right.
you know, double the distance of a 100-mile race, and double the distance doesn't necessarily mean double the time. Usually it's more than double the time, you know?
Right. Right.
And I think also, you know, we talk about runners, we want our runners to be adaptable. Our crew and pacers also have to be skilled at adapting because things change and what that runner told you may change mid run of what they need or want at that time too. You just don't know. You can't completely plan these events out, right? Even the waiting, like
Right.
you thought that she would come in at X time, it may be early, it may be late. You don't know. You just have to be able to go with the flow and like, okay, what's coming next and what can we do to keep
1,000%.
improving?
Yeah.
So, okay, so what were some challenges that you didn't expect pacing this time? Like there's always some random oddball that pops up. Or not pacing, let's start with crewing first, because you crewed for
Yeah.
for a long time before you even were recruited to pace, right?
Yeah. So I think the crazy thing with crewing is just not knowing, right? You want to be so prepared, but you also can't, they don't let you sit at these aid stations forever either. So it's kind of like walking that line of like, I'm there enough in case maybe they start to feel really great and it's a downhill coming into the aid station. And all of a sudden,
Mhm.
they pick up time and then you're like, oh my gosh, shoot, so we were kind of always trying to plan to be there an hour before, give or take. And thankfully, the way Tahoe is so kind of clustered versus being all the way around the lake like previous years, really the farthest aid station is about a 45-minute drive from where we were kind of parked by closer to the start. So that's helpful in the sense of you can kind of leave a little bit more last minute, if you will, than some other courses where you have to essentially go from one aid station to the next. And I think the unique challenge with this for us personally was they got shipped like a lower amount of trackers than they usually do. And then from that, they weren't programmed right, some of them. And then from that, so they didn't have as many extras in case something goes wrong. So we right away noticed like day one, like something is wrong with her tracker. Like she got to the first turnaround, like mile 30, 30 and some change. And then as she started to make her way back up to the start finish, which would be where we first see her, the distance, the time, the pace, everything just didn't seem right. We're both like something just doesn't feel right. And thankfully I was crewing with her husband. So, obviously he knows her very well. And we're both like, either something happened that she had to address, so she had to stop, or her tracker's not right. So we're like, okay, we got to get some sleep. This is our first, like our probably only night of sleep, like in the hotel room, which was so luxurious to sleep in a real bed. But then we kind of kept like, we wake up at 3, look at the tracker. Okay, it still is looking like she's going to be, here at this time. Let's kind of go back to sleep for another hour and then go. And so we went, and then, thankfully, even if like, so this is kind of just great information for anybody who's ever following anybody at home. Like, even if it looks like the tracker is not working, like the race professionals, like who are like, their job is to look at your dot. They know where you are at all times. So even if it doesn't look great for your family and friends at home, the race always knows where you are. So thankfully, because we were seeing her at the start finish, we could talk with like the race headquarters on kind of like, hey, her tracker doesn't seem right. And they're like, totally, like she's probably 2 miles out, give or take. We're going to get her a fresh tracker when she comes in. So, we had a little extra time there, but it was like, that was the first spot we were going to see her, which then you can kind of get a gauge of like, how are you moving? How are you feeling? to look at, the projections she kind of made for herself to see if those look possible, or, maybe we need to readjust. So from a crewing standpoint, that was almost kind of the hardest thing, was her tracker really didn't work great until I was almost with her, which then at that point, it didn't matter as much because like I could text her husband what was going on, So that was, I think, the hardest thing, was the tracker was so messed up for her. Like it showed she finished, and it showed she was back at mile 30. So it was just kind of like really just guessing on, okay, she wants to be moving 2.5 miles an hour. We're just going to have to plan for that at these next aid stations, So that's when kind of the crewing, that was the biggest crewing challenge, honestly, because everything else, this is a really easy course to crew because it is so close to civilization and nothing is so far of a drive from where you are. So you could kind of always, if you had to, get something in town, right? But I think the challenging thing from going from pacing and then crewing was that same timeline, like we got a good sleep Friday night. And then it was like at some point, into Saturday, into Sunday, I was going to jump in. So we got to the aid station, still tracker's not working. But like huge high fives and 100% to the Village Green people. Like Aaron was the race, like the head volunteer there, and they did a great job of communicating back with headquarters to try to tell us where in the world Nicole was, But so, we got there at like maybe 11:30 at night, and she didn't get in till like 3:30. So, but we didn't know that. So we kind of just, hanging out at the aid station and waiting. I didn't sleep anymore because I thought, she could be coming in any minute. So that was like kind of where things got a little tricky for both of us, for all of us really, because it was like she'd gotten a little turned around. I was kind of just waiting idly. And then, her husband too, we're all just kind of like the waiting game, Yeah, other than that, I mean, crewing this race is truly like if someone wants to run a 200 and they're worried about their crew, this is a great one to do because your crew, you have almost cell service the whole time. You're close to town. Like it's comforting from that standpoint.
That's great. I think that communication piece is such a positive for any event, honestly. I mean, we were just out in Colorado and we were just trying to link up with a ride to pick us up at like predetermined spots. And like any adventure, it doesn't go 100% according to plan. You try to build in a little buffer time here and there, but when you're relying on other people for aid and supplies, you're really kind of hoping that they're there when you need them. Like it's kind of catastrophic for you. For crew, for pacers to not be someplace where they should be, or to not be able to anticipate like when their runner is going to come in, because that's tough on the crew too. I mean, we talk about like the mentality and the mindset of the runner and practicing patience and not letting the anxiety get too high. But, just from my experience, waiting for a runner to come in, you're looking at your watch, you're like, okay, we're within the window where we expect best case scenario, and then you're just waiting for your runner, waiting for your runner, waiting for your runner. And that takes a mental and emotional toll on you guys, let alone doing that, like, a handful of hours before you actually have to then go and pace and make sure that your runner is on pace and you're on target and you're on course and you're anticipating needs and things like that. So having that type of communication is wonderful for you guys, because you can say like, hey, you feeling good? Where are you at? What are you going to need when you come through? Things like that. And at 2.5 miles per hour anticipated pace, you're not going so fast that it's like, I can't run and like text on my phone at the same time. Like there's probably going to be a point where you can just give a quick check or tell Siri like to send a message or something like that. So yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, is if you can have communication, do have communication, but maybe check with your runner to see how many texts they want to be having. Maybe set up your preferences so only texts from certain contacts come through, so you're not pulled out of the race with, so-and-so friend, like shooting just a, hey, what's up, while you're out, like, middle of the night, like, running Tahoe, and you're not pulled out of it,
Right.
I think also like during that time, you're waiting is really hard, and you always want to get there early because you don't want to be there late, but then you're also getting ready to, in your situation, getting ready to pace, and you're not taking care of yourself. I mean, how did you take care of yourself? Because you're so worried about the runner that sometimes you forget to eat and sleep and get yourself ready.
Yeah, like it's funny in my coaching, log for the week, it was like my last run was, maybe Wednesday, and then it was just like eat, sleep, that was my only job. So I feel like because we were so lucky to be in a town, where there was stuff, like I crushed hydration and drinking all the things and eating all the food before I jumped in. I got a, fairly good night's sleep, at least Friday into Saturday, right when we were in this, hotel. But then I think what ended up biting me in the butt later was that first night waiting to jump in with her, I should have slept. I should have tried to sleep, but my crew knows too, like when I get excited, I don't sleep. So I was excited. I'm like, I'm all like jacked up. I'm like ready to go. But that would have been like my last good sleep before jumping in. And so that ended up biting me later, for sure. But I was at least eating. We were hanging at the aid station. We at least got to see like the lead, athletes come in, which was super cool just to see like, how does an elite come into a 200 and crew and pace? Like, how do they, how does their team work? So it was neat to see those people. But yeah, that was the biggest thing I know I missed as taking care of myself as a pacer, was like trying to get more sleep before I jumped in. I don't nap well. And that night it was just, we were kind of stuck, in the waiting game, and I didn't want to be asleep, waking up groggy to then go. So it ended up all working out okay, but that was where I could tell like that was my biggest, hiccup, was I needed to get more sleep. But
right.
Yeah.
Did you learn any hot tips from the top crews? Did you learn anything that you took away?
Yeah, so like Harry, the guy that had just won Cocadonia and came into Tahoe, like he was shooting for under 48 hours. At this point, he was coming. We were waiting for Nicole to go like outbound Village Green. He was coming into Village Green, so we had I don't know, like maybe 30 some miles to go to the finish. But he was so cool, calm, and collected. It was really cool to see. Like you could tell his crew too knew him very well. He sat down. He started, just kind of taking care of himself. Like, his crew got him food, and then there was just like somebody takes the pack, somebody knows what to fill, somebody is working on his feet. So it was cool to see. Just like that he was calm and took the time that you knew he needed to know that he was going to be successful going forward. It wasn't this like frantic, like, oh my gosh, I want to do this course in under 48 hours. I'm winning. I need to like be super fast and get out of there. He probably took 20 minutes himself, which was, I think, just reassuring for like, the average runner going into something like this. It's like, you don't want to rush through these aid stations because they're so few and far between. Like, you really need to make sure you take your time to take care of yourself, because it's going to end up making you faster in the long run. So it was definitely cool to see just how his whole like crew worked on him. It was cool.
Right. Oh, that is awesome.
So we talked about too just now how on a personal level, like you could have done better with the personal care, the sleep and whatnot. What about like as a team, as a collective, before we move on to your pacing duties, like if you could highlight one thing that your team did extremely well and one thing that you guys could have worked on for next time? Say if you get like a carbon copy type event next year, let's say we get all you back for 2025. What is the one thing that you guys want to, or you could do better in the future?
Yeah, I think what was really great was Mike, Nicole's husband, and I were a good team in the sense of he knows her so well, right? It's your husband. And he's also been her crew for a lot of races. He solo crewed Bigfoot last year, which is a feat in of itself. He needed his own buckle for that. So he knew kind of like, he knew where she kept everything in her pack. I mean, not that I didn't, but he knew all that stuff like the back of his hand. And he knew that where she wants tailwind versus this, and like any food and that sort of thing. And I think so it was helpful for him to just know her so well and have crewed her before. And I think it was helpful for me to be looking through it as the lens of like, okay, as the runner in a 200, like what do you want? What are you gonna what's gonna make you feel most comfortable as you come to these aid stations? So I kind of let him run with refilling her pack, if she needed change, helping her change, that sort of thing. And then I was just more or less like, okay, we need to get you some food. Like while you're getting all these things down, like what protein thing sounds good to you? Okay, let's make sure you're, are you cold? Let's get you some water or hot water, or like turn the heat on in the car just to like get that stuff going. How are your feet? Check your feet. Like she didn't want help with their feet. And I was like, I don't care. I'll touch your feet. I had people touch mine, whatever. But just like, as the runner, as your brain just starts to be like, so, at some point you just you're done, right? You're just focusing on the bare minimum. So it's like, where's my needle that I can pop this blister with? So it's like, I was kind of at that point, the brain of like, okay, these are all the things that you might need. And then thinking through just like, what did I want people to check on me in? And so I was kind of trying to check on her with that stuff, it's like, okay, you don't want to go back out in the dark. Okay, sun's up at 5:30. Great. That's 90 minutes. Let's take 90 minutes here, rest, and then we get back going, and it's just making sure before we leave, like, okay, you topped off your water. Yes. You have your phone. Yes. Your watch is charged. Yes. You know, like going through the checklist. I had like a little checklist on my phone just to make sure I too wouldn't start to forget something. Before we you know, poles, you have your warm weather gear just in case, your lights, you got batteries, you know, all those little things. So I think from that standpoint, we were a good team of like, he just knows her so well. And I knew kind of from the runner perspective, things that I think we could have done better is definitely, you know, everything was in a bag at the start. And then it's, you know, how it goes, everything starts to slowly explode everywhere, you know? So I think because we had the capability of having a little bit more downtime, we probably should have organized your stuff a little bit better in between, you know? So like, you know, we had all these bags. It's like, okay, let's put long sleeve shirts in one, you know, so once it got crazier and we all got more tired as the race went on, it was like a scramble of where are these things in the back of the, you know, the SUV. So that was definitely a thing that we could have been better on. You know, I think once we saw her off, it was like, okay, yay, you know, I'm like, okay, take a breather, get some food for ourselves and get to the next one. But we probably should have, you know, just tackled the little, like putting things back where they belong so it's easier to find later.
Oh my gosh. And it sounds like we've all had that experience too of like just piles of stuff in the car. And you're like,
Yeah.
where the heck is this one salt tab? You're looking
Yeah.
for like a
Yeah.
tiny salt tab in a mountain of gear, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
It's
can
like
see how
what's
that'd be
clean,
pretty
what's
important.
dirty, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. But also too, I like what you said before about the strength. It really sounds like you guys like coordinated and communicated based on your own, like what you brought to the table, right? Like, of course, like her husband is going to know her better and is going to be able to execute the plan. Like they've probably been talking about it at the dinner table for a couple months. So he's got the
Yeah.
logistics of like, okay, what do I know she's going to need? What do I refill the pack with? What are the logistics that way? And then just you coming in and filling in those holes and bringing to the table of like, okay, well, I've done one of these events and here's what could potentially happen. So let's kind of, you know, build that buffer around like the actual plan to just say like, here, I'm going to surround us with the tools of what we might need. Even if we don't actually need them in the time, you're kind of filling in the potential gaps that might be there in the plan. So I think, you know, it sounds like that communication is huge. And it sounds like, you know, your runner did a great job at like bringing in a team of people, not just somebody who's good on their feet, but who has, you know, foot experience, who has physical capacity to help pace and crew, but also has that personal experience of actually being there. So it sounds like, you know, like the team dynamics were there for sure.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
well, good. Okay. So walk us through when you first see Nicole coming into the aid station and you know, okay, it's go time. I imagine it's somewhat kind of like Barkley marathons where it's like you don't know when your starting timer or your
Yeah,
conch is
totally.
gonna go off. You're just kind of waiting, like, where is she? Where is she? I gotta get going. Like we're gonna be, you know, like go time is nigh. You know, how does that
Yeah.
play out in your head?
Yeah. So so the section she came in from, it was a little bit of a road coming into the aid station, and it's just for some reason trails are always marked so well, but the roads are really tough to navigate in the dark, you know, because it's like you're looking for an arrow and you're, you know, at this point you're kind of looking down. So she got a little turnaround and was just like, I'm not going back out in the dark. And we're like, all good, you know. So we got her set up to sleep a little bit, and then I was just like, okay, I'm probably not gonna be able to sleep, but I can at least, you know, put my feet up in the car, make sure, you know, triple check my pack one more time. And then, you know, I knew she wanted to get going when sunrise hit. So kind of got up a little bit before that, you know, got some stuff from the aid station for us both to eat. And then, yeah, then it's just like, okay, you know, how do you want to tackle this next section? You know, it was going to be, thankfully we got started, you know, at daylight. So it wasn't crazy hot yet, but it was getting hot during the day. So I was like, okay, let's try to move purposely now so that if we have to slow down when it gets hot, you know, we've buffered some of that, you know. So yeah, just I think too, I was just kind of refreshing myself on what the next section looked like too, you know, so that if she was asking, hey, this and that, I would kind of know. So Village Green going into Brockway is, there's nothing, you have a pretty decent climb to start. And then from there, it's just, I think what can be challenging with this race is a lot of the course looks similar. And I think that's just because they can't go all the way around. But so we talked a lot in that first section, I think too, just because it was like, she was probably excited to have, you know, somebody else with her. I was super pumped to kind of get going. So I think that first section flew by. It was only a 14-mile section, which was nice. But also too, we were just kind of like, you know, getting to know each other, honestly. So, you know, like realizing similarities and things like that, and just talking about our families and, what got us into the sport. So I think that first section was so easy, almost, at least from my standpoint, because, she was refreshed. It was daylight. It's a new day, like she's talking with somebody new. So we just kind of had a great time going into that next stretch. And then once we got into Brockway, you could tell it was getting hot. So it was like, okay, let's get you, I'm letting her husband know kind of we're a couple miles out. So he was trying to get a spot in the shade for us to sit. And it was just one of those, coming into the aid station was a little frustrating because on the map, it looks like, oh, you just, it's a little up and a little down and then you're there, which of course it never is.
Never that way.
And I shouldn't have been like, oh, I think we just have one more up and then we're there, because, it never is. And it was just one of those like total mind, like energy sucks of like, there's a little road that takes you to the aid station as a crew. So you see all these crew people walking with their runner stuff. And then they're like, no, as the runner, you get to go off into the trails for another, 2-mile zigzag before you get there. And it's just like, I see the road. I see the obvious way we should be going, but we're going to have to take this trail route to get the mileage. You know what I mean? So at that point, I know like she was ready to be at the aid station. I too was just like, let's just get there. So got there. She decided, so like one of the medics that we'd gotten to know at Bigfoot was here. So she was like, I'm like, hey, if you want to get your feet looked at, now's the time, because this medic and she's great. So it was just, like, then it became the hard thing of, okay, well now we're both running. So I kind of let Mike take over making sure she was good. I would get us both food. And then, I'd put my own things in her drop bag so that I could kind of take care of myself. But I think too, I probably should have addressed my feet there, but I didn't. And I should have. But also too, you're just like, my feet are going to be okay. Like I can suck it up, but the next stretch was like such a long section and it ended up being, it's trail math. So it was 18 miles, but it was really more like 19 and some change or 20. It was really rocky. So every time you stepped, it was either like little rocks or big rocks. So your foot was constantly just like moving around, no matter how well you tied your shoe, what socks, what lube, you were going to have some weird spots. So that stretch too, we were moving still pretty good, but I could tell, I don't think she'd slept great before I went in with her. So, and it was getting hot. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop on this rock for a bit, so it's kind of managing, like, I want to give you the breaks, but also we can't break all the time. You
Right.
feel horrible being like, we got to keep going, but I switched my watch over before we got into town to show like pace or like miles per hour versus pace, right? Because I feel like when you kind of switch over from the 100 to the 200, like almost you just kind of want to know what you're moving per hour versus pace doesn't seem to matter as much, right? So I was like, okay, I wanted to try to keep us on that like 2.5, 3 hour or 3 mile per hour pace as best we could, knowing that at nighttime it's going to slow down just, by nature. So I think that next stretch was just challenging in the sense of we were in the heat of the day. I could tell she was tired. She kept wanting to, take breaks. But we had to just kind of get to that next section, which just took forever. It was a hard stretch. It was a very monotonous 18 plus miles, and it was just hard on the feet. And and she's now like, she's well past the 100-mile mark. We're getting into the, 130s, and that's just a lot on the body, so I could just tell she was kind of fading a bit energy wise. So I was trying to just like keep the energy up without being like obnoxiously glass half full,
That is
And just
a
to clarify
balance.
too, that section that you're talking about, that's from Brockway Summit to Tahoe City, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think what makes it hard, I don't know if it would feel the same way if you were going to go all the way around the lake. I think what made this one hard is everybody we were with, like we'd kind of, you start to jockey with the same people, like leapfrogging back and forth. And because they all knew Tahoe City was their turnaround, it just felt like it never got there. It was just like, you feel like a kid in the car back when, your parents were driving you somewhere, like,
Yeah.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Because for everybody, it was like, and so again, good or bad, because it's an out and back, you would start to see other people coming back through, right? Yeah. And in your head, you're like, I'm always like, great job, oh my gosh, whatever, and even if she didn't have the energy to say something, it's like, I wanted to, like speak for both of us, like, you're doing great. But in my head, I'm just like, oh my God, this has got to be horrible for her in a way too, because you're thinking these people have already hit the halfway and now they're coming back.
Right.
And I still have to get there. So while it's so fun to see other runners and interact in that way, it's also can be a little deflating to know, like, okay, they're already making their way homebound and I still have to get there. So that stretch I think was mentally and physically just tough because you just want to get to Tahoe City to say, I'm at the final turnaround and now I can head home. So once we did get there, it was like almost getting to be dark. It was like kind of dusk. So like we didn't need lights yet, but it was perfect in the sense of, okay, let's have her take a really solid reset, get some food, do all the things, because now like we are officially, when we leave here, homebound, so this is like, then it kind of turned into my pacing issue. I was starting to feel a little tired. She was going to nap, but I knew I needed to take care of my feet. And it's like, it's pitch black now at this point. And so and it's buggy. So it's like trying to take care of myself with minimal light, and not trying to keep her awake. So like they eventually just had like, just get in the car. It's okay. But I felt bad because I'm keeping her up. I know by working on my feet with the little door light on me, So it was like trying to make sure I guess I prioritized getting my body ready in a sense of like foot care, lube, changing clothes versus prioritizing sleep. I don't know if I could have done both, to be honest with you, because it takes me a little bit to fall asleep in that kind of situation. But then when she woke up the next day to kind of like get going, or not really the next day, but like, a few hours later, it was, headlamps on, it was pitch black. We're going back out to that same section, which was kind of rough. But at least, we're heading home. So everybody leaving that aid station was like super excited because it was like, okay, there's no more turnarounds. Now every mile we make forward progress to that finish, which felt really good. Again, we're just talking, we're having a good time. We're doing a good balance of like, just kind of working if a section required, just, kind of head down, no talking and just work. And then sections that were a little bit flatter, like, able to kind of still have some good conversation and such. But it's probably like 2 a.m. and I was like, wow, I am tired. Like I am tired. Like I don't even remember being that tired in Bigfoot. So I was like, shoot, okay. So popped a caffeine pill, hoping that's going to kick in, and another hour goes by and I'm like, keeping us on course. We're still moving well, but I could tell like as I'm looking around kind of to check for like the trail markings or whatever, I'm like seeing things. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to hallucinate, which I never hallucinated in Bigfoot. So I was like, shit, this isn't good. And I know Mike was like, her husband was like, if you need a break in that final stretch, because I was set to pace her from that halfway point to the finish. She's like, you just let me know. I'll have my stuff with me at all times. So I'm like, okay, I better write him. Like once we get to a stretch where I don't have to worry about like I'm going to trip and kill myself, I need to text him like, hey, I know I'm not going to be good for her if I'm not feeling good myself, so let him know that I think I was going to have him jump in just to kind of help with that like 14-mile stretch. And then, Nicole was asking me how I was doing and I was just like, I feel horrible saying this, but like, I'm tired and I know I need to be fully on to be helpful for you. It's kind of like they say in the, the airplane, right? Like you got to put your mask on before you can put your kid's mask on. So I was like, if I take a little hour snooze, I'm going to be able to give us that energy to push the last 40. So she was cool. She understood, which was great. So then it was just like, okay, all of our focus was just getting back to Brockway. So getting back into Brockway. And then I was like, it was kind of nice because then I knew I didn't have to worry about myself getting ready because I was going to have that little bit of downtime. So it was more just like, okay, what is Nicole? Like, let me help Mike really help crew her at that point and also make sure Mike's good to go for the next section. So then it was a little bit easier of not being like, okay, I still want to have my crew head on for her, but I also need to have my runner head on for myself. So it was nice to be able to take the runner head off for a second, focus on getting her ready. And then, they took off. I went right to the next aid station. I did want to get myself ready again before I took a sleep because I was like, I still need to be ready and then I'll know how much time I have to sleep. So I kind of like, I got all my clothes changed, I got my pack filled, took care of my feet, and then I like set my alarm to sleep for like an hour. Got an hour and woke up and was like, okay, I'm a new woman, let's get some coffee, I'm ready to go. So then it was just, then it was nice too, just to like, since Mike was with her, he was texting me kind of like I would text him updates on how they were doing, how they were moving, and they were moving really, really well once the sun came up. So that was awesome to see. And then, yeah, it was just like, okay, like now, back out there ready for the next push. So it was a learning curve for me of like, okay, I think going forward, like it was like we'd covered about 55 miles in a 24-hour period. And that was where I kind of just like, I was crashing. So I know now, like if I'm pacing this scenario again, it'd be like doing the full back is probably just not sustainable because like in reality, you're not really sleeping as much as you need to, you're prioritizing your runner getting sleep, obviously. And so like, I think for me, at least, like that 24-hour mark was like, okay, I need to take a hard reset for myself to make sure I'm actually useful,
Mhm. No, that's great. And that was going to be one of my questions was like, what was the learning experience that you had? Because there's always, like you're trying to take care of your runner, you're trying to anticipate needs, you're trying to anticipate your own needs. But like, where would you do better next time? And it sounds like that just knowing your body, knowing your capacity. And I love what you said before about like, yeah, like you personally could go and probably slog it out, right? Like you could get the miles done, but it's no use to your runner if you're in that condition. And that's why you're there in the first place. And I think that's a really
Yeah.
key like frame of mind to keep yourself in because, say if you get asked to pace another, which I mean, you may have plans to be pacing more races like this in the future. Um, like maybe just like we need to train for races, like I would imagine that it would behoove us to also like do a little preparation for the crewing and the pacing that's about to come up. And I'm actually looking at that with one of my athletes in August, crewing and pacing for Midwest states, which I'm like, you know what, like I've done a little bit of pacing, we've all been on group runs and things like that, but I think it's a little different when you do have that responsibility on you to not just be there but help somebody finish.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I went into it. Thankfully, my coach had done the course. That was her 200 back like when it was
Mhm.
the full loop around. So it was nice to have her, share with me just kind of some recon from that standpoint. And then yeah, we trained. I mean, I was supposed to run the whole back 100, so I was trained as if I was running 100, but I was trained similarly to how she trained me for the 200. So it was like instead
Mhm.
of doing true workouts, it was really just like keeping it aerobic. We did a lot of nasal breathing just to help with like practicing for altitude, and everything was really just aerobic. I did still got a couple like bigger back-to-back days to mimic the pacing I'd be doing. So I think that's a huge point. I think a lot of, especially if we already have athletes that we know want to help others, like training them to truly think of their 40-mile chunk is their own little like race. Like obviously you're in the mentality of helping someone else, but you need to take the training seriously. I think that's sometimes where people want to have like friends who maybe aren't as involved in this world help them. It's like educating them too on like, this is a lot. Like you need to be just as prepared for the mileage you're doing,
Yeah.
as your friend who's racing it, so it's like not just saying, oh yeah, sure, I can, all the pace is casual. I can easily do that. And it's like, maybe, but your body needs to be ready for it too.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's interesting that you say that because a lot of people will choose somebody that's a runner and they can run 20 miles, but it's a whole different game when you're doing 20 miles in a 200-mile race, right? It's the pace is different. You're out there way longer. Especially in the mountains, you're doing a lot of climbing that you might not be doing if you're from the Midwest. So there's a lot of things to
Yeah.
think about, I think, going into, crewing a race. I also think something to talk about, Reese, as you're talking about going into Midwest and Katie, I had one of my athletes recently help crew and pace a race, and he's also personally training for 100, and it really made him think like, wow, do I want to go through this? It's really hard, right, to watch your runner go through.
Hmm.
You've been through yourself in, finishing 100 or a 200, but it's harder to be the standby person who's the crew pacer and also in charge of that person to get to the finish line. And I think we should talk about that a little bit because I think it can deter some people from deciding they want to move forward after they watch the pain and agony, because these races aren't easy. If they were easy, everyone would be doing it, and we might not want to be, right?
Right. Right. No, that's a great point. Yeah, I think you have to kind of, and it's funny when Nicole and I were just talking from the starting point, like I'm like on one end of the spectrum, like type A planner spreadsheet list for everything. And she's more like kind of just roll with the punches. Let's see how it goes. And so it was also a cool learning experience for myself to be a little bit more like things are going to happen as they happen. Things are going to transpire as they transpire, and it's like making sure you have the things that you can be in control of from a crewing standpoint, totally planned out, but then also being, even more flexible because it's like, this isn't your race. This is someone else's race. So you would need to adapt to whatever is going on with them and not taking in the emotion of the surroundings too. Cause you're coming in and you're trying to help your runner, but then you also are in these aid stations surrounded with other runners, who could be crying, super happy, upset, emotion, like all the different things, like their feet, you could look over and you could see someone's foot who looks like it's been through, a meat grinder, and someone else who's like dealing with some other things. So it's like taking in the energy if it's going to help you, but also being able to separate others' energy if it's just going to be, hard. So kind of trying to like shelter yourself and your runner from, kind of the other big emotions that are at the aid station. Because sometimes the longer you sit there, it can be beneficial, but it also can be draining, to see other people's situations, unfolding in front of you, it can be hard.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, the psychological like adapting to somebody else's plan really stuck out to me there because yeah, I mean like you might have somebody who's very type A, somebody who's very type B, and you want to plan everything out that you can. And then you go and you ask your runner, like, do you have a plan? Do you have an idea of this, and this, and this? And they're just kind of like, no, I'll see when I get there.
Yeah.
So I can imagine how
Yep.
like that disposition difference can also be something that like when you are pacing, when you are crewing it, you got to remember, like we talked about that, like it's not your race, you're there to help somebody else's race. So I would imagine like that's when you kind of put away like one's own ego or one's own planning and preparation to say like maybe you channel that energy into your pacing strategy. But then, try to anticipate like, okay, they don't have all of this stuff locked down to the T. So again, that comes back to what we talked about before of having those options.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all stuff that we learned before the race, before we even
Right.
get to the point where we're crewing or pacing.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think it's like, like we all talk about with our athletes of, going in with, with goals, but also being flexible on those goals, so it's like, maybe you have a time goal, but you also want to have some sort of like emotional or satisfaction goal too, or, like I heard a lot of people, when I was listening to some podcasts before talking about like, yeah, I would love to get, maybe it's under 100 hours, whatever, but I also want to feel grateful the whole time. I want to enjoy the experience. Like I want to push myself, but I also want to enjoy, so, I kind of made sure to ask her too in the beginning, like if there's a goal that's really important to you, no matter what it is, like if you just want to finish and know you're excited to do another one, great. Like that's that. Or if it's a time goal and we're getting close to that at the end and you actually want to hear how you're doing time wise, like let me know, so I think it's important to kind of gauge, what your runners, overall goals are and help facilitate those the best you can. Right. And if plan A to Y all went out the door, it's like, cool. Okay. Well, there's still Z. Z is just like, let's just get this done. And, with all your limbs attached and still able to, maybe put a smile on as you cross the finish for the cameras, so.
So let's talk about, okay. So you came out of the pacing duty, you helped crew a little bit again. Did you then jump back in for the end of the race?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. And that section I was so glad to do this section with her. It was, so it would have been Village Green. No, yeah, Village Green to Spooner, I think. Hold on, let me look. I'm almost positive. Yeah, Village Green to Spooner. And Spooner, so the way Tahoe ends, you go back from that Village Green, which I was saying just was like this Rockstar aid station, to Spooner, and then Spooner to the finish. Each of those sections are about 18 miles, give or take, right? And Spooner is the last aid station you see before the finish. However, it's not crew accessible. Your crew can drop off a pacer and pick up a pacer, but you can't crew your athlete at the aid station, right? So I made the notes too for both of us. Like, so it was kind of a blessing in disguise. I think that Mike was able to take that middle section with her so I could get back and just like do a little bit of organization, make sure I was 100% set so I could help her get 100% set. Because in reality, we were like kind of having a plan to do the last 40 miles without seeing Mike again, right? So both of us being, self-supported with the aid station and our drop bags and such. And as I'm kind of, Mike's like letting me know that they're getting close, I'm starting to talk to the aid station and they're like, hey, we're doing a mandatory gear check before you all leave. It's going to get dangerously cold tonight. Like we're talking wind chills and stuff. So we're like, oh, okay. So we need to, I needed to make sure I had all my winter stuff, make sure she knows where her winter stuff is, grab it. She had the idea too of like, I have never done this, but just kind of keeping like one of those like trashy, plastic ponchos in your bag. Like I'd had, so I, just for an extra layer of warmth. So I had that with me. I had 2 emergency blankets with me, plus like the bivy we needed. I was just like, okay, it ended up being good knowing that we were going to go into this next stretch that could be, really, really cold. being prepared with the gear, and then, two, just knowing like, okay, we need to get her some good quality food in, because, if you're not, obviously you're depleted at this point, but like super depleted, it's going to be harder to keep yourself warm. Right. And just, lucid and all those things. So it was kind of nice that I had the time to like learn that information, make sure we were all going to be set before we went out. And then it was just, it was exciting to be like, wow, it's 40 miles left. Like, that's wild. It's still a long way to go, but it's also like so short in the grand scheme of things. And this stretch was just beautiful. Like, you do this kind of brutal climb, all exposed. Like, you kind of come back out of the road section. You go over to like a kind of a trail connector, and it's just 5 miles straight up. You're just up, 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 up. But we were just, we were clipping along. Like, she was clipping off really good miles. And so I just kept telling her, like, hey, like, because she also has asthma, which is wild to think, like, one, just tackling something like this, and then two, at altitude. It's just, and with this Tahoe long dust situation. So, we would make good progress, and then she would just, take a little breather, get some good deep breaths in. And I was just like, just keep taking constant little sips of water to help keep your, your throat like hydrated, right? Like, that was kind of the biggest thing I think I probably said over and over again. You're taking little sips of water, right? You're taking little sips of water, like the whole, however many miles I paced her, that I feel like that was the biggest thing coming out of my mouth. And then just taking those breathers, but we were moving really well. So I just kept saying, hey, we're moving really well. Like, once we get to the top of this climb, if there's stuff you want to run, you just let me know. Cause she was, when we'd have a climb, she would like to lead, which I like to, cause it kind of keeps her, lets her kind of keep the pace when she's on a climb, and not having asthma myself. Like, I don't know how that feels. So it was nice for her to lead on those sections. And I would usually take over leading when we were kind of more in the rollers or a flatter section. So I was super proud of her. She was like trying to run when we could run. We were moving really well. But then at some point she's just like, I don't know if the running is helping me. It's just, I think it's taking more out of me lung wise, than it is helping anything. And I'm like, yeah, let's just, right. Moving with purpose is the only goal at this point. Let's move forward with purpose. But she didn't really stop. Like, there was no like, I need to sit on a rock for 15 minutes or any of that. So we were moving really well. I know she was drinking. I was a little concerned. I don't know how much she was eating because I was in front of her, I'd be like, hey, do you need, and that's what's hard in these races too, is like day one, you can kind of treat it like 100, but then once you get past that and you're eating these heavier meals, like, you may not to eat for 2 or 3 hours. Right. So, I'm looking at my watch thinking like, okay, we've been going for 2 hours since we've been at the aid station. I know I'm going to force myself to eat something, and I would love her to eat something. But she just kind of kept taking little bites of trail mix, which is hard to gauge how much are you really eating, and you also got to weigh the, like, I can't ask you 50 times, are you eating something? You're going to eat what you're going to eat, even though, like dealing back with like Glenn when she was little, you can only, you can suggest things so much, but they're going to do what they're going to do. So I knew she was drinking. I don't think she was eating enough. Right. And so at some point you could just tell, like, the wheels were starting to come off, like for anybody we were kind of around, you could just tell, like, the pacers were like dragging along, and the runners were just like getting fatigued. This long climb. Now we're getting into the night, like it wasn't dark yet, but it was crazy. Like, every day, whether we were in town or on the course, like 2 to 3, the wind really picked up. So it was getting really windy. I threw on another jacket just because I could just tell it was starting to get cold. And I just kept saying, hey, when we really see the sun going down, we have to make sure we start to put on our cold weather gear, because, once you're cold, we're not going to get you warmed back up. So just kind of managing all the things that we knew were going to kind of start to come up. And I think now, she's on her day 4, like, sleep's catching up, lack of food's catching up. And, it was starting to just get a little bit harder. So we just kind of, kept toughing it out. And I think in that stretch is where she just decided, I think for herself, she needed to finish the race on her own, and, I wanted to, I was ready to do those last 40. I was like super excited to bring her to the finish. I was already kind of thinking like, okay, I'm going to let her go through and like speed down to get a video, all these things. But it's like, again, we're there to support our runner. And so if that's what she needed for herself, like, I had to, you have to respect that. And so I was like 100%, it's hard because we got into Spooner, and thankfully Mike, so like, you weren't supposed to be there, but a lot of crews were kind of parking in the lot where you could drop and pick off a pacer, and just to kind of like, wave to your runner and say hi, like, not necessarily help them per se, but, at least just to see a friendly face one more time, and he even was like, can I jump in with you? And, she was just like, I need to do it on my own. And so we both were like, okay, we're going to worry because it's supposed to be so dang cold. But But at the end of the day, if that's what you want, that's what you want. Right. And so, wished her well and sent her off. And, so that was the crazy thing too. Cause so then because I wasn't pacing anymore, I didn't go into the aid station with her. And so then we're just back on day one, watching the tracker. Thank God by now the tracker is actually working for her. So we can truly track the finish. But yeah, it was wild. I mean, it's I think the whole experience, I'm so grateful for it. And again, it was such an honor to be asked, and it just gives me I can be sappy. And so I immediately texted my crew from last year and was just oh my God, I know you guys have heard me say I love you and I appreciate you, but you're going to get stuck with a few more texts from me because it just makes it makes you appreciate every time you have that experience on the other side of something you've done, right? It helps you just appreciate those people even more, for being in your corner. So yeah, it's wild, all the emotions wrapped up in, a few days.
That's amazing. And that's a conversation too. What does the finish line look like for your runner? That was one thing that kind of surprised us about crewing, just about, less than a month ago was I never asked myself that question for my runner. Deanna was running, my girlfriend, and, Megan, who was pacing her, shout out to Megan Sloan. She goes, yeah, I think I'm gonna have a conversation with her in the last stretch of what she wants me to do for the finish line. Do you want me to cross with you? Do you want me to duck into the bushes so you can get a solo photo at the finish? What that's an important conversation because everybody has this different idea of what is it going to look like when I cross? And, after putting out such a big effort, you definitely want somebody to have that finish that they're imagining, so
totally.
It's so important, for your runner, I'd imagine too, that I do need to finish this solo is just kind of a mental, a personal battle that she was looking forward to going into, it sounds like.
Yeah. And with these races, I mean, even though I'm sure she spent, time completely solo, but at least, at that point too, really throughout, if you run into another runner that's about the same pace as you tend to just kind of link up and, maybe you hang out for a bit. And then if one person needs some space, you kind of move along. But it's so heartwarming. I know I mentioned this in the other podcast, but the community aspect of these races is just so incredible. I mean, you pass somebody or they pass you and it's doing great. Or if they see that you're sitting, are you okay? Do you need something, or you overhear someone saying they might be tired. I'm hey, I've got some extra caffeine pills. Do you want one? It's so much, everybody wants everybody to succeed, no matter what. I even some of the elites, you hear them talking about, seeing somebody, they're competing with for first place and they still, stop to make sure they're okay. Or they don't seem okay. And so they take the next section in with them. I think that is, that's what keeps bringing me back and was making me so excited to be back in this community again. Cause it's just, it's like no other. It's incredible. The care that everyone has for each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day too, sometimes it's more about survival than what place you finish in. How totally. Cold did it actually get on that final stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell I hadn't really needed to put on much cold stuff. Luckily, when we, if we were moving well enough, we were kind of good in just a couple layers. But even when we just stopped before she went off on the last aid, from the last aid station, I right away, I grabbed my puffer from my pack and threw that on. You could tell it was going to be cold. And then they had another stretch where they had to go pretty high up. I think around 9,000 feet to then get, descend back into the finish. So I'm assuming everybody put on all their winter gear because it was cold. Just, you could tell it was starting to get cold. When the way the wind starts coming, you're something's coming. Yeah. So that was, I think what was wild too, is just, there was way more temperature swings in this race than I'd experienced before, so making sure from that standpoint, you're just prepared as well is just kind of another layer of challenge to oversee.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. You're going up higher in elevation. The temperatures drop, the wind is hitting you, but also at that point, well, let's see, at that high point, you're over 180 miles and let's say 185, 188 or something like that. That's a long time just out in the elements, and temperature hits differently when you've already spent a lot of exertion outside. I've always mentioned this about my Grand Canyon experiences. I was shivering at 60 degrees when the sun was setting in the canyon. It's been so long baking that once that sun goes down, it's oh my, like your body just doesn't know how to regulate. So it's great that you guys had all that gear and you were able to throw it on. And, like the logistics of such a long race too, like that could have been the make or break, not having that like important piece of gear.
For sure.
If you don't have it, they won't let you go, or it's like critical, it's critical to finish.
Yeah.
Okay. So awesome. We went through most of the race there. Your runner crosses the finish line, right? You give a woohoo. Like, what is going on with you guys? The crew, the runner, everybody around. Like, what does the finish line of a 200 look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's electric, but it's also calm in a sense of, depending on how many people are finishing around your runner, and then your runner and your people, like, so it can kind of be like, woo, and then just the people who are there for the race taking their pictures and this and that, and your people, or depending, it can be like a lot, like what is super cool about these races too is like the last person, the DFL on the course, like everybody comes back out for them. Sadly, we couldn't, like, people who have to travel didn't come back, but like, whoever can come makes this huge, like person, human tunnel, and they run through it. So it's a real huge celebration of, start to finish, every runner that comes through. I mean, very similar to like all of our OMR, races, right? Like every runner is made to feel special. So, no matter if you know the person crossing the finish or not, you're teary eyed because you just, the battle they've been through to get to that point. And whatever their whys are, it's all coming, you just, the emotion they're feeling. So you can't help but feel emotional for everybody that you see get to cross too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it shows solidarity in our sport when you have
Totally.
people who can't go back, go back. It's one runner supporting another runner, not necessarily about like, the effort that's put, or not about the effort, but not about the finishing position. Like everybody's celebrated for the trials and tribulations of getting to the start line in the first place, let alone like completing the feat. And I think that's super important.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. That was a great conversation. I mean, like, I don't know about you, Loretta, but like I learned a lot for when I go pacing and crewing for my next or my runner's next event. So a couple things that I personally took away are that like I need to have those emotional conversations of like what do you want to hear? Like, how do you want to be uplifted? How do you want to be kept on course? Like, do you want to hear that you're at certain time? Do you want me to, like help you emotionally in any way? What do you not want me to do? Things like that. That's a huge takeaway for me. But also too, just trying to anticipate, like, going through 100 miles, anticipating what my runner might need. So that way we can be prepared at crew checkpoints, So that's going to be my big takeaway for August for Midwest states. So wonderful. Coach Loretta, Coach Katie, anything else you guys want to add to the experience?
No, I mean, it was incredible. Again, like any opportunity to be, to help someone like fulfill a dream and, see them on that journey is just so special. And again, that community is so great. So it was, from all standpoints, it was just great to be back, submersed in a few days where all I got to worry about is running and cheering other people on, versus, real life stuff. So it was great.
Nice. Thanks for sharing your story. It is really exciting to be able to crew and pace, but it is a big responsibility. It can be a stressful position to be in. Just be prepared for that, Reese. You're making decisions for people, but you're trying to get them to the finish line, and it can be a bit stressful, I think. But fun. It's rewarding. Don't get me wrong. It's rewarding.
Exactly.
It's just like, oh, you just want to make sure you're doing everything that you can to help them.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Coach Katie, for jumping on with us today and talking all things. Where can people find you? Where can they reach you? How do we get in contact with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and congrats to Nicole again. I'm at Coach Katie 60647. It's just Coach KT. Also find me on the OMR website. And yeah, I will be out at Javelina next, crewing my BFF at the 100K there. So yay, get to see some Arizona racing next.
That's exciting. Yeah, and congratulations to Nicole. I also coach her. So it was kind of nice teamwork when Katie stepped up to do the crewing and pacing, and I was able to frantically text her asking when the tracker went wrong. I'm like, what's going on? Because it was jumping everywhere. I'm like, she couldn't have just finished. She couldn't be back at mile 30. Where is she? So thanks for that, and congratulations,
Yeah,
Nicole.
of course.
All right, bye guys.
Beautiful. Thank you guys. Take care. We'll see you next week.